My name is Alara Merritt. I'm 43 years old. I used to command shadows. No one in my family ever asked where I went or why I stayed away. They told neighbors I dropped out of the Naval Academy because I couldn't handle the pressure. They told friends I moved overseas to find myself like I was some spoiled daughter chasing dreams across yoga retreats. They even told my little brother's fiancée that I was working at a coastal wellness center. She asked once if I taught aromatherapy. I smiled and said something like that. What they didn't tell anyone what they didn't know to tell was that for 15 years, I served as a Black-level SEAL commander embedded in off-book operations across 5 continents. I've carried bodies through monsoon floods. I've disarmed dirty bombs with shaking fingers inside tunnels no satellite could reach. But to my family, I was the one who failed. So when I walked into that room quietly without invitation and took a seat at the back row of my brother's Navy commissioning ceremony, no one noticed. No one said my name. I sat still, not in bitterness, in observation, and then he walked in. Lieutenant Colton Sharp in full uniform, chest lined with ribbons, jaw set like steel. He paused halfway down the aisle. His eyes scanned the room, then locked on mine. I watched him stop abruptly. His boots hit the floor like a heartbeat. He straightened his spine and raised his hand in a crisp, deliberate salute, and said in full voice, "Ma'am, SEAL Commander." The room fell silent. Even my father froze. Every head turned. My mother's breath hitched. My brother dropped the program in his hands. No one knew what to do with the truth that just ripped through a lie they'd practiced for years. That was the moment everything cracked. Not because I needed them to see me, but because the truth, once it breathes, doesn't go back in the box. I hadn't planned on attending the ceremony. In fact, I'd almost missed it. The invitation came late, unsigned. Miles, my brother, had texted me only 2 days earlier. "Don't make a scene. If you come, sit in the back." I told myself I was going out of respect. For him. But the moment I stepped onto the campus, I knew I was walking into something heavier than nostalgia. The flags, the formal wear, the proud families rehearsing how loudly to clap. It was a hall built for applause, but none of it was for me. So I found a seat in the last row, next to a woman who smelled of lilac and starch. She smiled politely, not knowing she was sitting beside a classified ghost. The speech began. My father was one of the guests of honor, retired Admiral Merritt. He talked about legacy and duty. He mentioned Miles. He mentioned himself. He even mentioned my cousin's ROTC scholarship. But not once did he say my name. I felt nothing. I had years of training for this kind of silence. But then came the moment. Colton Sharp, the commanding officer of Miles's new unit, entered late. The door opened. Light spilled in. He walked fast, eyes sharp, searching. He saw me. And when he saluted, it wasn't a whisper. It was a bullet through the fabric of a lie. I didn't return the salute. I just nodded barely. Enough. And in that second, I became more real than I'd ever been in that house. Nobody moved. My mother's hand trembled. She dropped her champagne glass, and it hit the floor with a sound far too fragile for a room built on discipline. My father's jaw clenched so hard I thought I heard a molar crack. Miles stood frozen, one hand still. Raised mid-clap, the other grasping the edge of the podium he hadn't yet reached. I didn't smile. I didn't flinch. I just gave a nod, controlled, deliberate. Not acknowledgement, not denial. Just a breath through history. And in that nod, the room learned what it meant to carry truth like a weapon. No one said a word. Not for 15 seconds. Maybe 20. But it felt like an hourglass turned sideways. Then the ceremony lurched back into motion. Sharp moved down the aisle like nothing had happened, took his seat, and folded his hands with military precision. The chaplain cleared his throat and resumed the prayer. Applause resumed, hollow and uneven. But the room had changed. They all pretended not to notice me now, not out of dismissal, but confusion. Fear, maybe. Because when a ghost steps into daylight, you don't look it in the eyes unless you're ready to see your own reflection. I stayed through the rest of the program, not out of respect, but because walking out would have meant giving them back control. I was done letting others dictate when I was allowed to disappear. When it was over, I waited until the crowd spilled out. Miles didn't look at me. My mother passed within feet, clutching her purse like a life raft. My father lingered for a second, looked in my direction, then adjusted his cufflinks and turned away. The last person to exit was Colton Sharp. He paused near my seat. "Permission to speak, ma'am," he asked, voice low. I nodded. He leaned in. "They never told me your last name. I imagine they never wanted to." He nodded slowly. "They said someone saved our entire unit in Coravon Ridge. Thought it was a ghost story. Now I know better." "I was never meant to be a story," I said. Just a silence. He straightened again. Silence doesn't stay silent forever. Then he walked away, leaving only the echo of rank and unfinished history. I slipped out the side entrance. No goodbyes, no confrontation. Just the sound of flags in the wind and my own footsteps clicking on pavement. By the time I reached the bus terminal, the adrenaline had already begun to fade. That's when the ache started. Not in my body, but somewhere deeper. A space no one trained me to defend. I sat on a metal bench and pulled out my secured satellite reader, a modified device I hadn't touched in months. My fingers moved out of instinct, powering it on with a series of coded presses. The screen lit up. One message blinked in red. Flagged data ping. Coordinates near. Trace initiated. My stomach turned. There are only two reasons why that system would send a red ping. Someone accessed a sealed record from Operation Dagger Point, or someone tried to erase it, and that someone was nearby. I stared at the words as the breeze pushed through the terminal. A family across the platform was laughing, passing around French fries, completely unaware that 3 blocks away, someone had just touched a file that could collapse a decade of secrets. I closed the reader and tucked it beneath my coat, stood up slow, checked for shadows behind street signs and parking pillars. I wasn't being watched yet. But the silence I'd carried for years, it had just made noise. And silence, once cracked, only gets louder. I drove for 6 hours without stopping. 2 gas stations, 1 vending machine dinner, no music, just tires on asphalt, and a single thought echoing louder than the engine it's begun. The coordinates from the data ping weren't exact, but the pattern was familiar. Someone inside the Eastern Defense Corridor had poked the ashes of Operation Dagger Point. That meant I needed eyes not digital, not encrypted human eyes. Someone who knew what to look for beneath the surface. Someone who'd seen it burn. I took the back road through Tall Pines Hollow, where the signs were handmade and the mailboxes dented. At the end of a long gravel drive, a wooden gate stood crooked, barely attached to its hinges. The wind carried the smell of soil and diesel. Samira Daw never liked horses, but she always kept goats. "Goats don't lie," she used to say. I parked behind a rusted-out truck that hadn't run since 2017. The porch light flickered but didn't go out. I walked up the steps slowly, my boots crunching dust, the weight of my past shifting with each step. The screen door opened before I knocked. Samira stood there in worn jeans, a faded marine hoodie, and bare feet. Her hair was pulled into a low knot, grayer than the last time I saw it. The scar under her left eye hadn't faded. Neither had the quiet in her stare. "Well," she said, arms crossed. "Congratulations." On what she gave a dry laugh. "For finally getting undead. I figured you'd resurface when someone poked the wrong bear." "Wrong bear," I repeated. "Wrong file." She opened the door wider. "Get in, before the goats start judging." Inside it smelled like chamomile and gun oil. A stack of disassembled radios cluttered the kitchen table. The fridge hummed like it held secrets. She poured us tea without asking. No one ever asked in our line of work. You either needed it or you didn't show up. We sat across from each other. She didn't speak right away. Just watched me with that unnerving stillness that made her perfect for recon and terrible at small talk. Finally, she said, "Dagger Point." I nodded. Pinged, flagged. Red level. Closest trace came from somewhere inside the Northern Coastal Defense Archives. She clicked her tongue once, almost amused. "Let me guess. You didn't poke it." "No. Family wouldn't know how." "Then who?" I hesitated. "Someone local," I said. "Someone with access." She leaned back. "You think it's an inside leak? I think it's a countdown." She sipped her tea. "And what's the timeline? I don't know yet." But the file that pinged was one of the raw logs, coordinates, comms, tactical overrides. Not just a mission summary. That changed her expression. "Someone's trying to unbury the bones," she said. "Or make sure they don't get unearthed in the wrong hands." We sat in silence for a beat. Then she asked, "You told anyone?" I shook my head. "You're the first. Not even your brother." "No." She didn't say why not. She already knew. In our world, trust didn't break loudly, it eroded in silence. "Do you have the rest?" she asked. I reached into my coat and slid a small hardshell drive across the table. Samira picked it up like it might bite, turned it in her fingers, nodded. "This still has the full log strings, original relay sequences. Audio and thermal, redacted manually, not algorithmically. You'll see the difference," she whistled low. "They let you keep this. They didn't know I had it." Samira chuckled. "God, I missed working with you." I almost smiled. We stayed up the next 2 hours scanning network reports and dead VPN nodes. She flagged 2 more pings from unknown IPs, one out of Norfolk, one suspiciously rerouted through a university library terminal. "Somebody's building a story," she said. "Or rewriting one." At 3:00 a.m., she finally leaned back and stretched. "So what's your play?" First I said, "We find out who else knows. And second, if they want to erase Dagger Point, they'll have to do it over my body." Samira's eyes didn't blink. Then she raised her cup and clinked it gently against mine. "To ghosts," she said. "No," I corrected. "To survivors. The thing about betrayals is, they never come dressed as enemies. They come with familiar voices tucked inside ordinary conversations. They come in uniforms that used to mean something. And in my case, they came with my father's last name, stitched above the heart." Samira's scan traced the second IP to a protected archive, the kind only accessible with legacy military credentials. It wasn't just a random data breach. It wasn't an accident. The query had been intentional, targeted, and focused solely on one file, a raw slice of Operation Dagger Point, time-stamped and tagged with my unit code. We cross-checked the access point. It came through an internal Navy terminal 2 weeks ago. The user login, Admiral R. Merritt, retired. My father. At first I didn't believe it. Not because he wasn't capable, he was, but because I couldn't imagine him caring enough to go looking. For most of my adult life, my father treated me like a ghost story you didn't want to tell at dinner. I was the daughter who left the academy, the one who chose chaos over conduct, the mistake he refused to name in speeches or family newsletters. So what was he doing reaching back into a mission so deep in the dark that most active commanders didn't even know it happened? Samira tried to tread lightly. Maybe it wasn't him she offered. Could have been someone using his old access, but I'd seen enough to know better. The trace included location metadata. The login came from his personal terminal, his home office. The one he always kept locked. The one that still had a nameplate on the door, Command Central, like he was still on active duty. I left before sunrise. Didn't tell Samira where I was going, just said if I don't check in by 1400, release the backup string. She didn't ask why. We both knew that sometimes the most dangerous enemy is the one who still has your childhood photo on his desk. I arrived at my parents' house just after 8. The lawn was perfect as always. The flag outside hung still. The air smelled like lemongrass and old regrets. I rang the bell. My mother answered. Her face blanked for half a second, then reshaped itself into a smile. Polite, controlled. "Alara," she said. "Twice in a week. That might be a record." I didn't respond, just asked, "Is he in?" She stepped aside. "Office, of course." The door was closed. I knocked once and walked in without waiting. My father sat at his desk scrolling through news on a tablet. He didn't look up. "Before you accuse me of anything," he said, "at least consider the possibility that I did it for the right reasons." That stopped me. He knew. "You accessed the Dagger Point log," I said. He nodded and flagged it. Why? Because he said, placing the tablet down, I was approached by someone from the oversight committee. They asked about my children. I didn't want to lie. I blinked. "So you handed over my operational record to justify my existence?" "No," he said. "I handed over a fragment to prove that I didn't fail as a father. That hurt more than it should have." "You erased me for 15 years, I said. "Now you want credit for a daughter you buried alive." His jaw tightened. "You chose to disappear. You made that call." "No," I said. "I followed orders. You taught me to. But when the orders demanded silence, you chose pride over presence." He stood then, not towering like he used to, but brittle in his conviction. "I did what I thought was right," he said. "For the family. For our name." "And what about mine?" I asked. "What did you do for my name, Dad?" He didn't answer. Instead, he walked to the cabinet and pulled out a folder paper thick marked "Confidential." Eyes only, he said it on the desk. This, he said, is everything they asked for. I didn't give it to them. Not yet. Because I wanted to see if you'd come first. I looked at him. Really looked. And for the first time, I didn't see the Admiral. I saw a man holding on to his version of truth, like a life raft, terrified that mine might drown his. I took the folder, didn't open it, didn't need to, because the fracture had already happened long before this. This was just where the light finally hit it. I sat across from my father in the same leather-backed chair I'd been sent to as a teenager when I said the wrong thing or didn't say it fast enough. The room hadn't changed. Framed citations, a shadow box of medals, a photo of him and Miles at the naval base's dedication ceremony, and beside that a small older photo of me at 17, still in pleated skirts, still smiling like I didn't know better. He leaned forward, fingers folded over his knee like a man preparing to brief a superior officer. You made that decision, he said. Don't pretend it was taken from you. I followed orders, I replied. No, he said. You followed silence. There's a difference. There it was. The accusation unspoken, but sharp. You were the one who left. You were the one who became unspeakable. I was ordered into black level, I said. I didn't get a say in what got erased. He stood pacing slowly. You got a say in how you left. You got a say in what you told this family. You made the choice to cut yourself out. I was 19, I said. I signed a classified operations waiver that voided my name. You think I could have just sent a postcard from Syria? He stopped pacing. You could have trusted us. I laughed, not bitterly, just quietly. You trusted the Navy more than you trusted your own blood, he said. You chose shadow over structure. And now you're angry we didn't hold a banner when you came home. I looked up at him. I didn't need a banner. I needed a chair at the table. The words hung there. He didn't sit back down. Instead, he walked to the bookshelf and pulled out a small USB drive, thin, red-cased. He turned it over in his hand, like it was an artifact. I accessed your file because I needed to see if there was anything worth defending, he said. They were asking questions. I didn't want to defend a myth. So you became the myth, I said. The noble father trying to figure out what went wrong with his daughter. He met my eyes. No, he said. I became the man who had to answer for silence I didn't cause but still carried. That one landed. I stood slowly, walked to the window. The yard was too clean. The world outside didn't match the weight of what was happening inside. I thought I said for a long time that coming back would hurt less than staying gone. That maybe time would fill the space I left. And did it, he asked. No, I said. It just made the silence louder. Behind me, I heard the soft clink of the USB drive being placed on the desk. You want the truth, he said. You didn't fail. You made us look at failure. That's why it hurt. I turned around. That's not an apology. It's not meant to be. Then what is it, a fact, he said. I walked toward the desk, picked up the drive. Did you send it to them? No. Did you plan to? He hesitated. I wanted to remind them who raised you. And in doing that, you erased who I became. We stared at each other. Two soldiers on opposite ends of a war neither of us declared. I didn't leak the raw log, he said, as if that made anything better. But you gave someone the breadcrumbs. He didn't deny it. I pocketed the drive. As I reached the door, he said, Your brother's still proud of you, you know. He just doesn't know how to show it. I paused. Tell him, I said. Because if you think I came back to fix what's broken, you're wrong. Then why did you come back? I opened the door, let the light fall across the floor between us. Because something darker is coming, I said. And this time I won't disappear to make anyone comfortable. I didn't wait for his answer. Because I'd already heard it. In every word he hadn't said, in every year of silence he let fester. The accusation wasn't invisible anymore. It wore his voice. And now, it wore mine too. The last time I heard Benji Leclerc's voice, it was through a cracked comm line in a bombed-out village schoolhouse. That day the signal came in garbled, distorted by smoke and steel. But his words had still found their way through the chaos. We've got civilians, small ones. Need to choose package or people. That was the moment the mission changed. Officially, Operation Dagger Point was meant to intercept encrypted transmissions from a black market financier coordinating insurgent movements across 3 provinces. We had 4 hours to extract a terminal and detonate the safe house. Unofficially, there were 23 wounded civilians in the building next door, collateral that no one had expected or planned for. The file I got from Benji last night had no header, no metadata. Just a 7-minute audio recording stripped from our internal comms, buried in a private server only he knew how to hide. He didn't say hello when he sent it. The message just read, "If they erase us, let this speak." I sat in my hotel room, curtains drawn tight, earbuds in volume low. The static crackled as the recording began. I heard my own voice first, clearer than I remembered. Secure comms active. Package location confirmed. Civilian presence in adjacent sector, repeat adjacent. Estimated 23. Children included. Benji's voice followed. Calm, controlled. Do we extract or engage? Objective. Then the silence, a full 4 seconds. That was the real sound of command. Not barking orders, but calculating lives. Then my voice again. Evac civilian first. Data can wait. That single decision changed the course of everything. We rerouted half the team. Burned 3 drone cycles covering the escape corridor. Lost satellite relay time. The terminal was wiped before we could reach it. And in the mission summary, none of that was included. The final report said, partial success. Comms unrecoverable. Local infrastructure compromised. No mention of the 23 people we saved. No note about the injured girl Benji carried on his back for 2 miles while bleeding from the leg. No mention of Samira taking shrapnel in the thigh while clearing a corner room because the medic had run out of morphine. They wrote our hesitation as failure. But that file, the one Benji sent, was the truth before edits. I called him as soon as I finished listening. He answered on the 4th ring. No greeting. You still breathing? I asked. Depends on who's asking. It's Alara. A pause. Then a sigh. I figured you'd call, he said. Thought you might not make it through the front door. I almost didn't, I said. Sharp changed that. Colton. He chuckled. Damn. Didn't think he had it in him. I need to know who else has this audio. No one. I copied it before the central drive was burned. I buried it under 7 shells in a ghost server registered to a dead NGO in Burkina Faso. Is it traceable? Only if someone knows your real birth year and my last blood type. Which is O negative, he said. Like a damn curse. I let that sit. Benji, I asked why now. Because they're rewriting it, he said. Because you got spotted. And once that happens, they dig. And when they dig, they don't just pull up your name. They pull ours too. I'm not trying to be a martyr. I know, he said. But they're going to make you one anyway. Might as well carry the whole truth when they do. I swallowed hard. There's a hearing coming, I said. Oversight committee, ethics and conduct. They'll paint you as reckless, he warned. They'll say you jeopardized the op for sentiment. I did, I said. And I'd do it again. Then make sure they hear that. I closed my eyes. That hallway, that girl, the smoke. The second where silence meant death. It wasn't sentiment, it was humanity. And somehow that had become the thing no one wanted in a uniform. Thanks, Benji, I said. For what? For remembering. He hung up without a word. And I sat there alone with 7 minutes of audio and 23 lives no one ever wrote down. Sometimes the real metal is the one they forget to forge. And sometimes, the one they try hardest to hide. I found Miles alone on the observation deck behind the officers' club, where the Pacific always looked like a painting too perfect to be real. The sun was setting, casting orange and steel blue across the water. He leaned against the railing dress, white still crisp, one button undone at the collar. The posture was familiar. The silence was worse. I stopped a few feet behind him, waited. He didn't turn. You saw the file, I said. No answer. You heard what Sharp said. Still nothing. I moved closer. The wind tugged at my coat and I could smell the faint tang of metal from the docks. Miles. Finally he spoke. I don't know what to believe anymore. That's a start, I said. He turned slightly, eyes never quite meeting mine. They told me you went dark because you cracked. Said you couldn't handle the structure, that you abandoned the mission. Left your team. Who told you that? He hesitated. Command. In briefings. In whispers. They didn't use your name, but I put the pieces together. You were the only one who vanished from the academy roster without explanation. I nodded slowly. And you believed them. His shoulders tensed. I believed what made sense, what was consistent, what fit the story they told, because it was easier than asking me. He turned now fully arms crossed. You disappeared. No letters, no calls. You let them be right in their silence. I was ordered into silence, I said. And I followed that order, not because I wanted to vanish, but because that's what Black Level meant. No names, no traces. You could have found a way. And risk your clearance, your future. I wasn't going to drag you down with me. He scoffed. That's not your call to make. No, I said quietly. It wasn't. But I made it anyway. Because I thought I was protecting you. He looked away again, stared at the waves like they might give him a different answer. So now what he asked. You want me to suddenly believe that everything I've been taught about duty and honor was a lie? No, I said. I want you to believe that sometimes the truth doesn't fit into PowerPoint slides and decorated speeches. Sometimes it bleeds. Sometimes it walks away because staying would have meant dying. His eyes narrowed. That sounds convenient. That sounds like survival. He didn't respond right away. His jaw flexed once, like he was chewing on something he couldn't swallow. I gave everything to wear this uniform, he said. I worked for it, bled for it. I know, I said. I watched you from afar. Every commendation, every placement. I kept the articles, the photos. You don't know how proud I was. His voice cracked, barely audible. Then why did it feel like betrayal? I stepped closer. Because silence always feels like abandonment, I said, even when it's born from love. His eyes glistened, but he blinked it away before the emotion could settle. I don't know how to see you anymore, he admitted. You don't have to see me as a hero, I said. Just see me as your sister. He looked at me, then really looked, and it was like staring into a mirror I hadn't dared approach in years. We were older, worn down by systems we didn't design. But the resemblance was still there in the jawline, the eyes, the stubborn set of the brow. I need time, he said. I'm not asking for forgiveness. Then what are you asking for? Presence, I said. Just don't walk away without trying to understand. He nodded slowly, but then his gaze shifted, hardening again. I still believe in what I was taught, he said. And I still stand by the uniform. I'm not asking you to choose between the Navy and me. You may not be asking, he said, stepping back, but that's what it feels like. And with that, he turned and walked down the deck, boots thudding in perfect rhythm. I didn't follow. For the first time, I didn't feel like I needed to explain my worth. Not to the brass, not to the headlines, not even to Miles. Because this wasn't about making them see me anymore. It was about being the sister I had never gotten to be. The one who stayed even when it hurt. The tribunal chambers smelled like old wood and cold politics. Rows of nameplates, brass-plated microphones, bottled water that no one touched. The kind of room where reputations get sanitized and humanity gets filed under other considerations. Dr. Miles was already speaking when I arrived, his voice smooth, rehearsed, and absolutely certain. A civilian ethics consultant with Pentagon clearance and the demeanor of a man who'd never been shot at. He stood behind the podium, gesturing toward a digital screen behind him. In reviewing case study Dagger Point, he said we must examine whether emotional interference led to mission compromise. The data indicates that a decision was made to prioritize unauthorized civilian evacuation over a confirmed asset retrieval. While morally commendable, this raises a critical question: did compassion override command? I stepped in just as those words landed. The screen behind him flashed red. A chart appeared, timestamps, call, logs, troop placements, clean, digestible betrayal. I hadn't worn the uniform in a decade. The fabric felt stiff on my shoulders, the collar foreign. But the weight was familiar, like an old injury that doesn't hurt until the weather changes. My boots echoed as I approached the central floor. Dr. Miles glanced at me briefly, then returned to his data. The chairwoman looked up from her notes. Commander Merritt, you're here voluntarily. I am. You're not under formal investigation yet. You've requested to speak. I have. Proceed. I faced the panel: 3 military officers, 2 civilian advisors, 1 Department of Defense liaison, and a room full of others who wouldn't meet my eyes. I took a breath. My name is Commander Alara Merritt. I was the ranking officer during Operation Dagger Point. I led a team of 6 into a confirmed hot zone with the objective of intercepting encrypted data from a known insurgent channel. Midway through the operation, we discovered 23 civilians, including injured miners, in a building adjacent to the objective site. I paused. No reaction. I could have said we found unicorns, and the room would have looked the same. We had two options, I continued. Complete the mission, or save the civilians. I made the decision to save the civilians. Dr. Miles cleared his throat behind me. I turned slightly. Dr. Miles just presented a hypothesis that compassion overrode command. He's not wrong, it did. Murmurs stirred in the room. But I'd challenge the implication, I said. That compassion and command are mutually exclusive. That choosing humanity is somehow a flaw in leadership. The chairwoman raised a brow. Commander, the concern is precedent. If every mission leader abandons the objective for a moral detour, it wasn't a detour, I said sharper than I meant. It was a recalculation based on real-time variables. A standard part of field leadership. The intel we received prior to insertion was outdated. The safe house was compromised. The target data was corrupted. The only active value left in that zone was life, and I chose to preserve it. Dr. Miles stepped forward slightly. Commander, with respect, your record is decorated, but also sealed. Many in this room have never seen it. We're working with limited visibility, limited facts. That's by design, I said. You don't get to redact a life and then question why you can't see it clearly. A pause. Then I added, you said I let emotion guide the mission. You're right. I saw a bleeding child holding his mother's hand and I made a call. If that disqualifies me from command, then maybe we've confused what leadership really is. Silence. Real silence. The kind that pricks at the air and dares someone to breathe. The chairwoman spoke next. Do you have evidence to support your version of events? Yes, I said. But I'm not submitting it today. Why not? Because I wanted you to hear it first, not from a file, not from a debrief, but from the person who carried those choices. I stepped back, straightened my spine. The medals on my chest didn't shimmer. They never do in rooms like this. But they were there, earned, not awarded. I looked out at the faces that wouldn't look back, and then I turned to leave. Not because I was dismissed, but because I'd said what needed saying. For the first time in 10 years, I had worn the uniform not to blend in, not to obey, but to be seen. And if they still chose not to, that wasn't my burden to carry anymore. 2 hours after I walked out of the ethics tribunal, I got the alert. A soft vibration on my encrypted device, almost imperceptible, like the breath you don't notice until the air changes. The message came in red font, time-stamped and location tagged. Dagger point access flagged. Unauthorized ping. Origin Pentagon. Internal. I didn't breathe for a second. Someone inside was pulling on the wires of a mission that no one was supposed to know existed. Not because it was illegal, but because it was inconvenient. I ran a trace. The IP bounced twice, redirected through a secure congressional terminal, and terminated in the office of one man, Colonel Kendrick Holmes. I hadn't said his name out loud in 13 years. Not since the last training cycle I completed under his oversight, back when my team didn't have real names, only numbers and blood types. Colonel Holmes had been a rising star in the intelligence community, a warfighter turned strategist, sharp-edged and politically charming. But beneath the medals and polite Southern cadence was a steel-bone belief biology doesn't bend to ideology. That's what he told me once, in a briefing room with no windows where my performance evaluation sat unread in his hands. You're good, Merritt, he said, but this isn't your war. Women weren't built for shadow command. That was the day I realized I didn't need his permission to lead, just the clearance code to do it quietly. Now he was back, only this time not as my instructor, as the man trying to delete the evidence of who I had become. I didn't go through official channels. There's no protocol for confronting a man like Holmes. No form to fill out that says, "Excuse me, sir, why are you dismantling history?" Instead, I sent a private message through an encrypted relay he'd recognize. The same one we used during blackout operations in Ukraine, back when trust was calculated in seconds, not sentiments. Meet me. 1800 hours. 14th floor. No escorts. He showed up. Of course he did. Holmes was the kind of man who thrived on being unafraid. He arrived in a pressed gray suit, clean-shaven, and walked like he still wore rank on his shoulders. I stood by the windows, watching the sun bleed out across the skyline. When he entered, I didn't turn. You still like to make an entrance, I said. And you still like to hide in silhouettes, he replied. Alara? He only used my name when he needed something. Tell me why you accessed the Dagger Point files, I said. No pleasantries, I've outgrown pretense. He walked over to the side table, poured himself a glass of water, didn't offer me one. The committee asked for insight on your operational record, he said. Given the attention your testimonies stirred, they wanted clarity. You mean control. Same thing depending on how the story's told. I turned now slowly. And what story are you telling, Colonel? He took a sip, measured. That you were a talented operative who went too deep. That your decisions, while understandable, introduced risk. And that the SEAL structure isn't designed to carry ambiguity, especially not when it wears a woman's face. There it was. The belief he'd never retired. I made a call to save lives, I said. You'd have left them to die. I would have followed the directive and rewritten it in the debrief. He smiled. Like I said, same thing. I walked toward him, each step anchored with restraint. You're deleting the full log, aren't you, piece by piece? Reframing it into a cautionary tale. It already is one, he said softly. Not because you failed, but because you succeeded and they weren't ready for that. His honesty should have infuriated me. It didn't, because it confirmed everything I already knew. You want me erased, I said. Not because I broke, but because I didn't. He didn't respond. Didn't need to. The silence was the confession. I won't let you, I said. You won't stop me, he countered. You don't know what I've kept. He raised a brow. Careful, Commander. You're starting to sound defiant. I leaned in, voice low. No, I'm sounding like history, and she has a habit of echoing longer than men like you plan for. He finished his water, set the glass down with a click. Then he turned and walked out. And for the first time in years, I felt the war wasn't overseas anymore. It was here, fought in files and footnotes, in memory, in silence. And I was done being silent. I didn't wait for permission. I walked straight into the secured corridor on the 12th floor of the Armed Services Intelligence Annex, past the retinal scanners, past the polished boots and blank stares, past the thin veil of civility that coats buildings built to bury truth. I had the clearance, technically, but I also had something better: history. The door to room 1206 was closed, but not locked. I pushed it open without knocking. Colonel Kendrick Holmes stood near the far window, hands folded behind his back, staring out at the gray blur of Washington in mid-November. The rain made the skyline look like it was grieving. He turned slowly when he heard me, not surprised, not nervous, just patient. I shut the door behind me. No words, no introductions. He gestured toward a chair. I didn't take it. We faced each other across the polished floor like relics from opposing sides of the same war. The years had softened his features, but not his conviction. You're still walking like the fight's not over, he said. I met his gaze. Because it isn't. He nodded. No, I suppose it's not. I pulled a slim file from my coat pocket, printed logs, time-stamped. The ones that showed exactly when his ID accessed the raw data on Dagger Point. I slid it across his desk. You want to rewrite the past, I said. Let's talk about what's on the line. He didn't look down, just kept his eyes on me. You're making this personal, he said. It isn't. You accessed sealed records to reshape a narrative around me, I replied. That feels personal. I did what I was asked to do. By whom? By the system you once served. I let that sit. Long enough for him to realize I wasn't going to break first. He finally stepped forward, picked up the file, flipped it open without reading, closed it again. You made a choice, Merritt, he said. Back then, you diverted from the objective. You let your emotions dictate your command. And it cost the mission. It saved lives. That wasn't the mission. It became the mission, I said. He narrowed his eyes. That, he said, is where we differ. To me, heroism is fulfilling the objective. You don't get to redefine duty every time the wind changes. To me, I said evenly, heroism is knowing when the objective is wrong. His voice dropped a register. Still calm, still certain. You weren't trained to improvise morality. No, I said. I was trained to serve. And I did. In silence. Without medals. Without parades. I obeyed until obedience meant becoming something I couldn't live with. He took a slow breath, walked to his desk, set the file down. I don't doubt your intentions, he said. But in our line of work, intentions don't shield consequences. You broke from protocol. And I would again, I said. His eyes flashed just for a second. Even knowing it would cost you recognition, your record, your reputation. Yes. Then you're not a soldier, he said. You're a symbol. And maybe that's exactly what they need now. We stood in silence, not out of respect, but reckoning. Finally, he moved toward the side drawer, pulled out a small device, a secured drive, placed it on the desk between us. I'm going to ask you a question, he said. And I want a real answer. Go ahead. If I erase this, if I delete every line of code that ties your name to that mission, no blame, no glory, just erasure, will you fight me? I looked at the drive, then at him. I won't fight you, I said. I'll outlast you, he nodded once. Not in concession, but in recognition. You always were relentless. No, I said. I was forgotten. That makes a person dangerous in ways you never learn in training. He slid the drive back toward his side of the desk. You shouldn't have come here, he said. You shouldn't have underestimated who I'd become. Another silence. Then I turned and walked out. No salute, no final threat. Because we both knew the real war had already started. Not in battlefields, but in archives, in whispers. And if he wanted to erase me, he'd have to erase everything I'd ever saved. Samira didn't call. She didn't need to. The message came through our shared failsafe channel, an old emergency protocol we'd once used to reroute supply drops during a sandstorm extraction in northern Mali. It was blunt and coded in shorthand, only the two of us still remembered. Pulled. Effective immediately. Unit reassigned. Access revoked. Assume separation strategy. I read it twice. Then again, they were splitting us up. Not to discredit us directly. No headlines. No accusations. Just quiet dismantling, like pulling threads from a net until the whole thing collapses without ever making a sound. I sent a single word back copy. 15 minutes later, Benji sent his own update. Confirmed. Samira off-grid. Her credentials deactivated. Archive ping on my VPN. Looks like they're tagging everything we touched. Classic divide and degrade tactic. Higher-ups want us isolated. We're being unwound. He ended with something colder than usual. You were right. It's not about what we did. It's about who remembers. That's when I felt it. Not panic, not even anger. Just that deep, quiet ache that comes when you realize you're not just being silenced. You're being unwritten. Benji and I had operated on 5 missions together. Samira on 3. None of them perfect. None of them easy. But each one left us bonded in ways no post-op debrief could explain. And now, one by one, those bonds were being cut. Not with blades, but with protocol. Later that afternoon, I stood alone outside the tribunal building. Coat pulled tight, wind picking at the hem of my uniform. The hearing had adjourned, but I stayed behind not for closure, but to catch a fragment of clarity. That's when I saw him. Miles. He stood half hidden beneath the awning on the far end of the courtyard, hands in his pockets, posture stiff. Not marching toward me, not avoiding me either, just standing there, watching. I didn't wave, didn't move. We stared across the space between us. I don't know how long it lasted. 10 seconds. Maybe 30, but it was enough to notice something had shifted in his eyes. They weren't angry, they weren't ashamed. They were searching, measuring. And in that moment, I knew Miles wasn't just stuck between duty and family anymore. He was standing in the doorway of a story he hadn't been allowed to read and deciding whether to step through. He didn't speak, didn't gesture, just gave the faintest nod. And then he was gone. I stayed there, wind pressing against my back, thinking about how silence can mean so many things. An ending, a question, sometimes even a beginning. When I got back to the hotel, I powered up my secure tablet. The internal logs had updated. I'd been flagged again, not for an infraction, not for breach. This time it read, Subject Merit Ilara. Status under informal review. Recommendation observe contain delay, contain, like I was a contagion. The irony wasn't lost on me. I'd spent 15 years in containment by choice, by oath, by necessity. Now they wanted to recontain me not for what I'd done, but for what I might still choose to do. I closed the file, let the room go still. Samira, Benji, Miles, all caught in the storm, but none of them pulling back, Not yet. We were still linked, still watching, still holding something bigger than Order's memory. The truth had never been about proving a point. It had always been about making sure the people who lived in the margins of redacted files didn't get erased twice. Not by bullets. Not by politics. Not by silence. I didn't sleep that night. Instead, I drove 3 hours out of the city to a ridge no one visited anymore, a place Samira and I had used years ago when satellite relay towers were still vulnerable to signal drift. The wind was brutal up there, the kind that doesn't push its strips, peels off whatever's left of your silence. I set up the satellite dish, calibrated the angle, and connected to a private network I hadn't touched in almost a decade. One deep breath. Then I dove in. Holmes had been busy. I decrypted 2 archived after-action reports tied to Operation Daggerpoint. One bore my name, the other didn't. The first was the one in my record, the report I had submitted but clearly amended somewhere in the chain of command. The second was Holmes's fabrication. In it, he shifted tactical decisions, realigned timestamps, and even created false discrepancies between team movements. He'd written history in a way that cast me as the misstep, a rogue commander too sentimental to execute. But the most damning detail wasn't in the words. It was in the metadata. The file had been backdated by 16 hours. That time gap. It matched the window between when we pulled those civilians out and when we lost a SEAL unit to delayed air support. A tragedy, yes, but one Holmes had framed as my fault. I knew then this wasn't just about legacy. It was about liability. He'd rewritten the mission not to bury me, but to protect himself. I didn't file a formal complaint. I didn't go to a tribunal or draft a statement. Instead, I did what every ghost operative learns to do when the chain of command becomes a chokehold. I opened a secure file. Inside it, I embedded a recording one, taken unknowingly by a secondary drone during our debrief post-Daggerpoint. The audio wasn't crisp, but it was clear enough. "You don't get to shift the weight of your poor planning onto my team, Kendrick," the voice of Commander Rhea Monroe said. "Those men died because of your call delay, not Merritt's evac order." Holmes's response: "That evac wasn't part of protocol. We never authorized it." "You authorized silence, and I refused," Rhea snapped back. I played the clip 3 times before uploading it. Then I added one line of text, "Withdraw honorably." Or I'll make sure every SEAL team from East Coast to Coronado here's how you use them as a smokescreen. I encrypted the file and routed it through a backdoor only accessible by upper echelon advisors, Holmes's own peer circle, a place where shame lingers longer than failure. I didn't expect a reply. That wasn't the point. This wasn't vengeance, it was pressure. A whisper with teeth. At sunrise, I took the dish down. Left no trace. Just like old times. Back in my car, I didn't feel relief. I felt alignment. Like I'd stepped back into the rhythm of a life I thought I'd left behind. The rules were different now, but the battlefield was still familiar. I checked my secure inbox later that day. One message. No sender. Just a subject line noted. Movement commencing. I stared at the screen. That's all I needed. He knew I had the truth. And now so did others. Holmes might not fall, but he would shift because power doesn't fear justice, it fears exposure. And exposure, I had learned, is the quietest weapon in a war of reputations. I closed the laptop and exhaled. No headlines, no applause, just the soft satisfaction of a lie coming undone thread by thread. And somewhere beneath the noise, I could feel the tide turning. Not loud, not fast, but enough. They called an emergency session, security clearance only, high-level names, uniforms with silver stars, eyes that weighed history like currency. I was there uninvited but not unarmed. My records, my truth, my silence. Then the doors opened, and in walked Miles, still in his cadet whites, still with that tension in his brow like he hadn't fully chosen which side of the line to stand on. He cleared his throat, stepping toward the panel. "Requesting permission to submit material for the committee's review," he said. Murmurs followed. One general looked annoyed. Another looked curious. Permission granted. Miles placed a flash drive into the secure terminal. The screen blinked, then filled with a grainy video time-stamped 10 years ago. I felt it before I saw it. That voice. Captain Merritt diverted the mission route to evacuate the injured civilians. She took responsibility for the deviation, but I need to put this on record. Her judgment saved lives. It was Rhea Monroe, my mentor, the woman Holmes had buried under paperwork and transfers, the one person who'd never stopped believing in me even when she disappeared off the radar. And here she was, still alive in the archives. Miles didn't speak immediately after the footage ended. He just looked around the room, then at me. I believed what I read, he began. What they told me, that she disobeyed orders, that she put her unit at risk, that she failed. He turned to face the committee. But files can be doctored, and truth doesn't vanish, people just stop looking for it. He paused, swallowed hard. I no longer trust the version of events I was handed. I trust the woman I grew up watching fix broken engines with bare hands, who made sure I never missed a school lunch even after 3 back-to-back deployments. I trust Alara Merritt. My throat tightened. He looked at me again. I choose to believe in the person I once called sister. And just like that, I wasn't alone anymore. The silence in the room cracked. Then came the next voice, soft, even, deliberate. Samira Daw stepped forward. No badge, no rank, just presence. She had found her way in, no one asked how. She always had a way. I no longer have access to the systems, she said. But memory doesn't need credentials. She laid a hand over her chest. Not dramatic, just honest. We were deployed to Sector 9, 8 clicks from the extraction zone. Intel said the building was empty. It wasn't. I saw it in her eyes. She was there again in the rubble under fire. There were 12 children trapped underground. No food. One of them couldn't walk. Alara made the call. Not to abort, not to escalate, but to hold. We held that building through 2 airstrikes. One of them missed by less than 20 meters. She turned to the board, to Holmes. And no one ever came to relieve us. She looked around. You want to talk about failure, fine. Call it failure. But if that's what it was, then I hope I fail like that 1,000 more times. Someone shifted in their seat. A pen dropped. No one moved to pick it up. She stepped back. No applause, no nods. Just a room full of people trying to remember how to breathe. I walked forward without a word. No speech prepared, no defense. Just a black case in my hands, one that had followed me across continents, but never been opened in public. I set it on the table, flipped the latches, inside the uncut logs. Dagger point. Pre-op through post-op. Every voice, every line of code, every diverging decision tree. Every deviation logged not as defiance, but as adaptation. Tactical necessity. I didn't explain it. I didn't have to. I reached in, pulled out the disc marked Alpha Transcript, inserted it into the system. The speakers played one line. This is Commander Merritt. Civilian presence confirmed. Rerouting extraction zone to Grid 7. Mission continues under Contingency Protocol Zeta. And then my voice again. Repeat, mission continues. No assets compromised. Civilian lives prioritized. Approval not received. Proceeding regardless. That moment, raw and irrevocable, hung in the room. I stepped back. Let the data speak. Let truth carry the weight of silence. The committee just sat there. No one objected. No one moved to cut the feed. Because for the first time in a decade, they weren't watching a fabrication. They were watching what really happened. And I finally stopped needing them to believe me. Because I had already begun to believe myself again. It didn't come with headlines or salutes. No medals pinned on podiums. No generals stepping down with apology speeches. It came in the form of a 6-page internal directive, declassified just enough to mean something, but not enough for the evening news to pick it up. Following recent disclosures, it read a committee will be established to reevaluate covert operations led by female officers over the past 2 decades. Priority to be given to missions involving whistleblower reports or command deviations, later deemed justified. In another document, the language was colder, sharper. Colonel Kendrick Holmes will vacate his position effective immediately due to obstruction of strategic data during active threat response protocols. The decision reflects a failure in procedural integrity, not in individual capacity. There were no celebratory memos, just notifications, transferred access, accounts disabled. Holmes didn't resist, didn't protest, just signed and left his office cleared by 4:00 p.m. sharp. I watched from the parking deck. He walked to his car alone, head upright, steps clean. The same man who once told me that women in special operations were a liability. Now dismissed not because of a scandal, but because the very data he'd tried to suppress had refused to die in silence. They didn't fire him for misogyny, or even cowardice. They let him go because the truth finally carried more weight than tradition. That was how systems changed, not through grand revolutions, but quiet corrections made in the aftershock. There was no ceremony, just the final breath of an era that no longer fit the world it tried to rule. And for the first time, the silence that followed felt right. 2 weeks later, I got the letter. A formal invitation, white envelope, gold insignia on the flap. My full name on the front. Not a code, not a call sign. Captain Alara Merritt. I held it for a full minute before opening it. Inside, a request to attend the annual internal commendation ceremony. The last time I'd been invited was 14 years ago. That time the invite was rescinded before I could reply. But now they weren't calling me back because of heroism. They were calling me back for integrity. I debated not going, thought about it for days. But then Miles called. His voice was steady. "You don't have to show up," he said, "but I will. Because this time I want to stand on the right side of the story." So I went. No dress uniform. I wore a civilian blazer, navy blue with a single pin, my old unit's insignia. The hall was full. Not with press or politicians. Just people who had fought. People who had survived. People who knew the cost of silence. When my name was called, I stepped forward slowly. There was no clapping, only attention. Waiting. At the podium stood Miles. He didn't read from the script. He didn't mention Dagger Point, or investigations, or corrections. He held the medal in both hands, looking at it like it weighed more than it should. Then he looked at me. "I used to think honor came from orders," he said, "from doing exactly what you're told, exactly when you're told." He paused. But I watched someone risk everything: career, reputation, family, because she chose to protect lives that didn't even speak her language, and I didn't understand it back then. I judged her. He turned to face me fully. "I don't say this as a soldier. I say it as a brother." He placed the medal in my hand. "I should have seen you sooner." No applause followed, just quiet recognition, not of rank, not of redemption, but of something far older, something like truth, something like coming home. She stood at the back just inside the door. The ceremony was over. Most had already begun to leave. Quiet conversations, brief nods, the rustle of coats and medals. But when I turned, I saw her, my mother. Her hair was pinned up in the old style, the same she wore at my brother's commissioning. Her dress was plain, respectful, hands clasped in front of her, trembling slightly. She didn't move toward me. Not until the crowd had thinned, not until the last photograph had been taken, not until it was only me left by the edge of the room. When she finally stepped forward, I didn't know what I expected her to say. But it wasn't this. "I don't understand," she said softly, "but I was wrong. For never asking." Her voice cracked on the last word. I didn't cry. Neither did she. There were no grand gestures. No long embraces. Only hands reaching out, her hand then mine. And when they met, something ancient in me, something wound tight for years, released. I didn't forgive her. I didn't need to. This wasn't about forgiveness. It was about beginning again. And sometimes, that's all you need. Later that week, I returned to the base, not for an interview, not for a briefing. I went to the wall. It stood quietly beside the mess hall, shaded by a lone tree, barely noticed by those passing through. But I knew where every name was. Every engraved line, no photographs, just letters, dates, ranks. Some names were real, some weren't. Ghost names, cover names. But every single one meant someone lived. Someone fought. Someone made a choice and paid the price. I brought a single flower, no bouquet, just one. And a slip of paper folded once tucked under the stem. I whispered their names, not aloud, but within. Then I placed the flower at the foot of the wall, next to the line that listed Operation Dagger Point, and with it my note. "We don't need your faces to remember you, but let us never forget why you chose to stay." That was the real victory. Not headlines, not medals, but memory. Loyal, quiet, undeniable. The day of the Academy's reopening ceremony arrived bright and gold. I stood at the edge of the quad where the shadows were long and soft. The wind moved gently through the banner's blue-silver navy. The same colors I had once worn in silence. But not today. Today I stepped forward. The sunlight hit my shoulders. I didn't wear insignia. I didn't need to. Behind me, people began to gather, young cadets, civilians, instructors, and those I thought would never return. Some of them had doubted me. Some had remained silent. But now they stood still, not with weapons, not with applause, with awareness, recognition. No one asked me who I was. They didn't have to. I had stopped proving it the moment I chose to speak, not to be seen, but to be heard. And as I walked toward the lectern, I felt nothing grand. Just peace, just release, just enough. Before we say goodbye, I have just one question. Where are you watching from? Is it a quiet morning and you've just poured your first cup of coffee, or a late night when stories like this keep you company? Let us know in the comments. We read everyone with gratitude. And if this story touched something in you, if it made you pause, or helped you remember someone you once were, please consider subscribing to the channel, not just to hear more stories like this, but to be part of a community that still believes in kindness, in healing, and in second chances. Thank you for spending your time with us today. Wherever you are, I hope you carry this story with you. And remember, sometimes the miracle doesn't knock on your door. It waits quietly until you're ready to open your heart. Take care, and we'll see you in the next story.